hope that this is going well. And now I just need to, oh no. Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Enlightenment. I'm your host, Joshua the Archon, and I'm here to, I want to thank everybody for coming in and watching the show. And I think tonight's show is going to be a fantastic discussion just based on prayer. And we are going to do a very deep dive into the conversation of what prayer is and everything. But prior to that, I just want to thank our Patreons to begin with, those who are following on Patreon to the Atheist Enlightenment. I want to thank Linear. I want to thank TART, Mikey Famine, and Luara Magee for helping us out with that support. So it's very appreciative, and I'm very grateful for that. If anybody else wishes to be a Patreon in the future, well, I will put the link in the bottom of the comment section once our conversation is wrapping up. So if anybody really wants to, they can go into the link and actually check out our Patreon page. Oh, and so, and I think, sorry about that, one second. So I think that with the Patreon page and everything, it is definitely going to help me out continue what I wish to do and help out the community in these particular ways. But now I want to introduce GodlessGranny to the show. GodlessGranny, thank you so much for coming in again. It's a pleasure. And I love having you on because I get to figure out more things and understand a lot more about religion in and of itself than how I understood it beforehand. So I really do appreciate you coming on the show. Please introduce yourself to the audience, and then we can delve into the conversation at hand.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to explain something for the audience. And this is why I was frowning at the beginning, is I was watching the page that has the tab where I have the show open, and it wasn't coming up. And so I tabbed back to the studio, and it clearly said that we were live, and we had been live for more than a minute. And I tabbed back and I refreshed it 4 times, and it still was saying we hadn't started. So for the audience who are saying that we started very abruptly, that's why. The show was 2 minutes in before it started streaming, and I have no idea why it did that. I've never seen that happen before. But yeah, Josh, you got cut off for the first 2 minutes.
Okay.
So yeah, the entire intro got cut off, and the things that you said at the very beginning got cut off as well. Sorry.
No,
I probably should have interrupted you.
It's all good. It's all good. Things happen. So all in all, what the conversation is for tonight is going to be based on prayer. We're going to delve into the actual topic of it and really flesh it out and ask, what is prayer in and of itself? How does prayer come about, in a sense? Do we need prayer in order to have some sort of connectivity with God, or could we actually have religion without prayer whatsoever? So that's the kind of topic matter that we're going to stay around, and we're really going to just delve at that. So what I I think the first thing that I should ask is, what is prayer?
Okay. I'm going to answer the question that you asked the first time that I didn't, which is who am I? And then I'll get into what is prayer.
That is right.
Okay. I am Godless Granny. I have a channel and I do anti-theism and I do women's issues and I do LGBTQ issues. And I've even done a little bit of cooking as well. My latest episode is me making macaroni and cheese and talking about the historical issues with the Exodus story. And then now your question, what is prayer? Okay, I have approached this topic from a couple different perspectives. I became a Christian at the age of 16, and I was a Protestant going to an evangelical free church. And then for a bit, I went to an Assemblies of God church where prayer is something completely different. They do talking in tongues there. That was not my cup of tea, and I did not stay there long. And I was in various Baptist churches. I got married right out of college, and I married a man who was active duty Army, and so we moved a lot, and so we changed churches a lot. Mostly, we went to different varieties of Baptist churches, but about 20 years into my Christian journey, I was convinced by a group of Calvinists that Calvinism was a more accurate understanding of Christianity than my Arminian understanding. So I changed to a Calvinist church. And so what is prayer varies some according to who you're talking to. It does vary. For example, one of the biggest differences is the Catholic churches and the Greek and Russian Orthodox churches. They believe in praying to saints as well as praying to God. And they believe that if you pray to a saint, that the saint will then carry your prayer to God. It's actually for some of them a sign of humility. They don't feel worthy of praying directly to God. Instead, they pray to an intercessory who takes their prayer to God on their behalf.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, the Protestant view is that when Jesus died on the cross, that opened the avenue that we can take our prayers directly to God. And the biggest thing they point to is the verse in Matthew that at Jesus' death, that the temple veil was torn into. Actually, I'm not sure if it was at the death or at the resurrection, but anyway, the temple veil was torn in two, and that was supposed to be symbolic of that the veil between God and man was now torn away, and man has direct access to God, that man can pray directly to God.
Huh.
Yeah.
So
Most Protestants will tell you that prayer is just talking to God.
So prayer is talking to God without an intermediary, in a sense. It's just your direct line of communication to the higher being in and of itself.
Yep, exactly.
Interesting. Okay, and with as you stated, with the Catholics and with the
Russian and Greek Orthodox, yeah.
Right. Then they actually, or certain of them actually pray to saints in and of themselves in order to be those intermediaries to answer their prayer or ask God to answer their prayer, in a sense, if I'm understanding that correctly. Interesting. I actually didn't know that. Okay. So when we're actually delving into a prayer, right, when we're really building up and we're asking for something, why do we have a tendency that we want to ask God for that particular something, right? Like, why? It seems to me that prayer sometimes could be more self-serving in a sense than it is to actually be beneficial to everybody. And I was just wondering, why is that, where it seems that prayer is like a universal thing in a sense?
Well, okay, there's a couple different things on that. First, there is a Bible verse where, or I should say a Bible passage, where people are directed to bring their request to God. In fact, there is even a verse, I don't remember exactly the verse, that says, let your request be known to God. There's the verse in Psalms, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. So, of course, it's okay to express the desires of your heart, because then God will give you the desires of your heart. There's also the parable of the woman and the judge. And the woman goes to the judge and asks for justice, and he says no, but she keeps persisting. And because of her persistence, he finally relents and says, okay. And Jesus used that as an example of what prayer is supposed to be. That if you ask for something in prayer and you don't get it, you're supposed to keep asking. Now, one of the things that makes no sense is, why would God say no and then, okay, you've pestered me long enough, now I'll relent and give it to you? And most pastors will tell you, no, that's not the correct way to interpret it. It's more that it's a test of your faith. Will you be faithful enough to keep asking and asking? It all comes down to, how do you look at it?
Interesting.
Almost everything about prayer, you can look at it from different angles and come up with completely different ideas on it.
Right. It's based on the person's interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Now, Calvinists say that God is in control of everything. He is completely sovereign. Everything is predestined. And your prayers will not have any effect on God. They will not change God's mind. And so I asked a pastor that very question. Well, if we cannot change God's mind, if we cannot change anything by praying, why do we pray? And one of the answers is so that you have this relationship with God. If you're going to have a relationship with someone, you need to be talking to them, and God's word is God talking to you. Reading the Bible is God's talking to you, and prayer is you talking back to God. And that's how you are able to have a relationship, and communication can go both ways. Second reason for prayer is a community aspect. Because when we get together and have corporate prayer and we share our prayer requests, we share our burdens. And we're also told to bear one another's burdens. And we can't do that if we don't know what one another's burdens are. So we get together for corporate prayer and we share our burdens with each other.
Okay, so in a sense, the reason for prayer when it comes to Calvinism is at first to have that open line of communication with God. But at the same exact time, it's supposed to bring people together in order for individuals to try to help each other out, or at least get what's off their shoulders out into the public realm or around the circle of individuals. Then they can kind of help each other out in that specific way, if I'm understanding this.
That's the idea. Where they are complete hypocrites, though, is in what they pray for. Because like 90% of the prayer requests are all for health issues. I've got a cold. My son has the flu. My grandmother has cancer. My sister-in-law has a tumor. And so and so is having surgery. I'm having a colonoscopy. Pray that everything would go well. And they're all the kinds of things that you can share without really sharing anything personal.
Right.
And where I find them to be hypocritical is that it is very rare to have people share or ask for prayer because I'm having problems with my marriage. My child doesn't believe. My child is gay. Those kinds of things, the really important issues in life, are usually kept hidden. Now, there are exceptions. There are people that will come with all of their prayers and they will bare their souls. And, I have no qualms with those people. But for the most part, I have found that most people are more interested in their image, and that I can't project myself as having marital problems. So I'm not going to ask for prayer for that because that's revealing too much.
Okay, so towards a certain extent, people ask for prayer when it comes to health, when it comes to when something is wrong with them. But then when it starts getting too personal, they close that door on prayer in a sense because they want to have that private. So in a
Mhm.
sense, they are being hypocritical based on what they're praying for because it's not um, well, not that it's not a private matter, but it seems like there's this tendency of how could I say it? There's this ten.
It's the need to bear the image that Christianity is great, that as long as you are living the Christian life, that everything is fine. And to admit that you have serious problems in your life is to admit that you are failing at Christian life.
That's actually a really good way of looking at it. So in a sense, they're scared of their image and
Mhm,
their image being tarnished around their fellow believers. So in
mhm.
a sense, they keep that behind closed doors in order to keep the facade of the perfection or that I'm following within God's footsteps or Jesus's footsteps and all the tenets that have.
And this is why we find so much abuse within the church, because when there are problems, we keep them hidden. We
Right.
don't talk about them.
Right. So in a sense, people because they're trying to keep their image uh, unsullied in a sense,
Mhm.
there's there seems to be this wiggle room where abuse can happen in a
Yes.
sense. And that's where we're seeing the hypocrisy
Mhm.
within the prayer in a sense, is that because they're not putting everything on the table, there's this ability where people can still be uh, how could I say it? They can still abuse, but at the same exact time have that image of being that perfect parental figure or that perfect husband or whatever the situation may be.
The pressure to keep up that image is even greater with the unbeliever than it is with the fellow believer, because you don't ever want an unbeliever to think that if they were to give their life over to God, that they would ever have any problems.
Interesting. So in a sense, it's kind of like self deceit, or
Mhm.
in a sense, it's actually deceit when it comes to certain individuals. I will deceive those individuals in order for them to think that it's much better to come to Christianity because their entire life will be better in a sense, but they don't even know that behind the closed doors that
Mhm.
all these abuses are happening and
Mhm.
I'm not literally following the tenets which Christianity has put forward. In a sense, I'm creating my own tenets in privacy. But then when I go out in public or when I go out with my church friends or whatever the situation is, now I put on the moral hood in a sense and act like I'm not mightier than thou, but I'm the perfect arbiter of what Christianity is. That's very interesting. It's a very interesting outlook. So, in a sense, there. So, would you say that prayer is a placebo in a sense when it comes to people wanting the best for themselves, but at the same exact time, they want to manipulate their private surroundings where, like, the prayer in and of itself isn't meant for the other people who are being dealt the abuse. It is only meant for me, the abuser, in a sense. So I pray for myself.
No, I wouldn't say that,
Okay.
because when we do get together and pray, we pray as much or more for other people than we do for ourselves.
Okay.
Most of the time, we do focus our prayer requests on other people.
That's good. Okay. Okay. So that's very good to know because I do know certain other certain individuals where when they pray, it is predominantly for their own betterment rather than the
Mm.
betterment of the entirety of the community or the greater whole of humanity or whatever the situation may be. So that's why I was kind of sending that um, just to ask that question, just to make sure that
Mhm.
if that's likewise within the Calvinist community, or if that's just certain individuals, but not the general whole. of the community itself. So that's actually good to know. The other thing that I would like to ask when it comes to prayer is that if prayer is based on this non-arbitration, if we're looking at Protestantism, between you and the deity itself, then it seems that the prayer in and of itself isn't, how could I say it? The prayer which you are asking for, you kind of know is not going to be answered in a sense, right? Because there's
In one sense, yes, but in another sense, no, because one of the goals of the Calvinists is to line your thinking up as much as possible with God's. And that's why we can read, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. That the more I align my desires with God's desires, the more I will receive my own desires. And so if God is answering my prayers in the affirmative, that I'm getting what I'm praying for, then I'm aligning myself with what God wants to happen. But if I'm not getting what I'm praying for, that means my desires are out of line with what God wants.
Okay, now that's very interesting. So you're saying that if I get the prayer which I have communicated with God with, right, and I get that, then that means that that's within the plan that God laid out already. So you were meant to get that in a sense,
Right.
even though that you
Right.
didn't know, you were
Right.
meant to have that.
Right.
However, if you didn't have it, then that means that that wasn't within his plan for you.
Exactly.
So in a sense, it sort of
Now
sounds like
here's
stoicism.
where that really broke down for me.
Right.
It was in, let's see, Robin was probably about between 8 and 10 years old. So this was probably around 2009, 2010 timeframe. But when there was that huge famine in Somalia, I formed with just Robin and myself, we declared ourselves to be the Somali cyclists, and we were going to raise as much money as we could for the people of Somalia. And the goal was to bicycle from Fort Wayne, Indiana, where we lived, to the capital of Somalia. And this was kind of fun. I figured out how far it was, and I was trying to get people to give us donations. And I said, for every dollar that you donate, we will ride virtually 1 mile. In other words, we will get on our bikes and we will go ride 1 mile for every dollar that's donated. And then we will map it out that if we were actually able to travel that, where would we be? And we were trying to raise like $1,500 for Somalia. Right. Well, we ended up raising about 500. And the funny part is that I kept graphing our progress.
Right.
We drowned in the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
Because we got stuck in the Atlantic Ocean. I could not get any more donations. And so I finally gave up and posted on Facebook that the Somali cyclists drowned in the Atlantic Ocean.
That's good. That's good.
I was really hoping we could at least make it to the west coast of Africa, get out of the ocean. But yeah, every time we got another donation, I would plot, this is where we are. This is where we are. But we got stuck in the ocean.
Oh, no. But was that with the backing of, because you said it was with you?
I did it through a group. There was a group that was raising money for Somalia. Okay. I can't even remember the name of the group right now. I could go find the T-shirt. But yeah, and when I did that, obviously I had a lot of focus on the people of Somalia at the time. And so, of course, I was praying for the people of Somalia every day. And the situation in Somalia was not getting any better. And so I went to my pastor with the question that you just posed, how can this not be in God's plan? How can God's plan be for children to starve to death? How can a loving God make that the plan? And the answer I got was, if you pray for something and you don't get it, it means you didn't need it. I said, how can you say that these children don't need to live? And
Mm.
that was the answer I got. Well, they don't. They do not need to live.
Wow.
And yeah, that was one of the cracks in my faith,
I
was
can
being told
definitely.
that, hey, if you don't get it, you don't need to live.
Right, exactly. And just like how I've heard with certain other individuals, for instance, like when you read the Bible and you're seeing the destruction of certain civilizations and stuff. But then people ask, well, okay, like I can kind of understand that God doesn't want his chosen people milling around with people who are deceivers in God's eyes, or the one who is going to change people's minds when it comes, or his chosen people's minds when it comes to his existence with another god or with another idol. But then after I hear, but what was the point of wiping out the children and women as well? There could have been something else that God could have done, or maybe even changed the children's minds in a sense when it comes to his believing that he exists. Why does he need to wipe out the entirety of the civilization in and of itself? And I think this is the same exact thing when we look at this circumstance, as you were saying, that was happening in Somalia at that time, where it just seemed like everybody, like God, this was not in the books for them. This was not part of God's plan, and these people had to suffer because they have been neglected by God for some whatever reason it is. And no matter how many times these individuals would pray, that these prayers wouldn't come to be because it wasn't in your cards. It wasn't in your destiny to survive this circumstance. And I can definitely see how that could shake somebody's faith to its core when you're really looking and asking that question, why? Like, why does this need to happen when there can be better ways in order to have a greater outcome in a sense rather than having millions starve to death?
Mhm.
I think that there's a couple of questions within the.
I was just going to say, I want to answer Mark Caesar's question because I have a really good story about that.
Sure, absolutely. Let's put it up. Have you or Gigi ever had time where you were sure your prayers were answered, that you thought you were responsible for some good happening? Yes.
Yes. Um, I have three different particular instances I'd like to
Oh,
talk about with
please.
this. The first was an instance where I was praying, where it was the first time that I really felt like I had actually heard from God directly.
Hmm.
And I was praying and I asked God to show me how he felt about my city, the city of Fort Wayne. And I was suddenly overwhelmed with a feeling of pain and I groaned.
Hmm.
And it immediately brought to mind the verse that said, the Spirit itself intercedes with you with groanings too deep for words. And so I felt like this was an answer from God, that the Holy Spirit was sharing with me this groaning. As an unbeliever, I now realize, it was just me projecting, what I already know about the Bible. And the only thing I ever actually heard was my own thoughts because I didn't hear anything audible. But, it was just this very sudden feeling. And I felt like that was something from God. The second one was when I was talking to my mother on the phone, and my mother was an unbeliever. And I'd been trying for 30 years to convince her that Christianity was right. And I was finally making a little bit of inroad by telling her we had just recently moved to Huntsville. And I was telling her how much trouble we were having finding a church. And she said, well, that's one of the advantages of being Catholic. You just go to the closest Catholic church. What's wrong with just picking the closest church and going there? And I said, my biggest concern is that Robin is 12, and Robin is at the age where Robin needs to start making his faith his own. He needs to start finding his own journey and his own path. and I need to find a church that has a good youth group that will help him along the way. And so as my mom said, I never realized before, but I never really had my own faith. The only faith I ever had was my father's faith. And I thought, my mom finally gets it. She needs to have her own faith. And so I quickly started praying and I said, God, what do I tell her now? What words will convince her to believe? And I did not hear an audible voice, but within my own head, I heard a response of, there is nothing that you can say that will answer her.
Mm.
And I was flabbergasted. I thought, my gosh, really? There's nothing I can say. And I realize now that that was, my own thoughts answering myself. But at the time, I really felt like I had heard from God. And the third one is answering the second part of what Mark Caesar has asked. Have you ever thought you were something responsible for something good happening? Yes, I had this dream. It was a very strange dream, and it was a very real dream. And when I woke up from the dream, I could not tell whether this was real or not. And when I shared the dream with other believers, they convinced me that it was real and that I had actually done something. And here's what the dream was. I dreamt that I saw a child that had just died and was on a hospital bed. And a demon came down and was going to take the child to hell. And somehow I knew that that child was a believer. So I started yelling at the demon and telling him, leave that child alone. That is not your child. That child is a child of God. You cannot have that child. And after yelling at the demon for a few minutes, an angel came down and picked up the child and took the child to heaven. And I was convinced by other believers that I had actually interceded on behalf of a child because his angel couldn't get there immediately at his death, and some demon had come and tried to take this child. So, yeah, for a while, I believed that I'd actually done something.
That's awesome. That's actually a pretty cool dream. Like to save someone's soul from being taken to hell in a sense. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
pretty. For me, when I was a believer, and I think I'm gonna try to tackle both questions and also Linear's question as well into what I used to believe in or what I used to pray about and stuff because and I'm going to try to meld it together with both the questions. When I was a Muslim, I used to pray for the betterment of the Ummah itself, in a sense, and that I was hoping for the, how could I say it, that the Muslim world would be fixed, that the Muslim world would be able to solidify itself again, like it did underneath the Rashid, how like it did like underneath the Uthman, like how it did underneath the Sultanate of Muhammad II and underneath Suleiman the First, right? So that was my number one thing. How can the Ummah get better? Can there be a particular thing that could show the world that Islam is the one true belief system? I think that was the thing that I was constantly kind of praying for, was not necessarily for me, but just the building of something that I believed at the time was more peaceful and more coherent in a sense. And once there was one Ummah in a sense, then there can be peace. Then God's realm can be brought down in a sense, and we can live in some sort of utopic world in a in a certain sense, right? And yeah, I do believe that one of my prayers did actually have a good outcome. When I was again, when I was a Muslim, there was I forget what it was exactly. I think that there was something happening in Yemen, and there was like a famine or something going on in Yemen at the time, And for me, obviously, because it was a Muslim nation and everything like that, I was praying for Yemen to get better and for Yemen to beat this famine. And all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but I mean, Saudi Arabia seemed to have been giving Yemen a lot of aid during that time. So I thought that my prayer was being answered because maybe their land, the Yemenis' land, right, was ravaged by famine. But now you had another state that was able to help it in a certain way. Obviously, there was a couple of things that was left out, but at the time, I was happy because it was definitely a certain amount of aid that was going into Yemen at that time from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and everything like that. So it was kind of in tandem with the other thought that I was having with the Ummah kind of getting together again and not being these separate nations, but one large nation in and of itself. So I think I hope I answered both questions coherently, at least.
I want to answer purple.
Oh, sure, please. Let me get down to Purple's question.
It's not really a question, it's more of a comment.
Oh, is it every time the Packers?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
it.
let me put
That's
that
it. Yeah. As an, I made a video about, 8 months ago about the pizza god, that, how gods come into existence, that it started as a joke that every time we ate pizza, the Packers won. And it's kind of an easy thing to predict because out of the last 30 years, the Packers have had 25 winning seasons. So if you eat pizza every time the Packers play, they're more likely to win than lose. And so we came up with this running joke that, hey, we have to have pizza whenever the Packers play so that they win, because if we don't eat pizza, the Packers lose the game. And so we invented the pizza god.
Oh, that is fantastic. But it's true though. Like there's some truth, validity to that because it's kind of like, okay, well, it seems when I pray for something, now it seems that underneath this particular thing, whatever it is, being A, that now being A has some sort of effect on what I'm praying for. So there's going to be more validity or truth value towards being A compared to being B that might not have enough of that heads flipping in a sense, right? Where it's kind of like, okay, it's constantly landing on tails, but now being A is helping you flip heads a lot or something towards that extent. So yeah, no, it's definitely very interesting, but I like that. I like the way how you guys came up with that thought process.
And that goes along with when I was a believer, we were encouraged to keep prayer journals where you would write down all the things that you were praying for. And then, have a second column. And every time a prayer was answered, put down the answer to that prayer, so that you could see that God was, in fact, answering your prayers.
Okay.
But you have to kind of forget about the fact that everything that you were praying for and the answers that came to these prayers could all happen naturally, even if there was no God there.
Exactly. And in a sense, they can all happen without prayer or without, because I think that human beings are very superstitious in a sense. And so, like, even if there wasn't a God, I think that there would be some sort of like Buddhist type thought process or something like that that would be there still, because I think a lot of people act on intuition. And I think intuition is the thing that slowly but surely creates some sort of either God value or some spiritual value. And then you can build up on that in order for the individual to get a being of some sort afterwards, after some sort of emergent processes happen. But for me, I think that when we look at or question, I think questioning is always something that I find is the best solution to certain questions or even to certain answers that you hear. Always question it, always ask, well, why is this particular thing something that I should believe in the first place and everything. But also, another thing that I would like to ask is that when we're looking at prayer in and of itself, would we think that the prayer manifests itself into something different in a sense? Like, because most people, when they have a prayer, they're predominantly having it silent. So there's some sort of telepathic
Mhm.
connection between being who's praying and the being that is taking the prayer and mulling it over. So does when we're praying, do you think that there's some sort of placebo effect where we feel more at ease after a prayer's been said, in a sense, like something is going to happen from it, even though,
Yes.
okay.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, yeah. After praying, yeah, I definitely would feel like, there's going to be some kind of answer to the prayer. The answer might be no, but at least I've been heard. You feel like I've been heard.
Right. And that's the same thing that I felt too when I was a Muslim. I thought that, okay, well, even if my prayer wasn't heard, or not wasn't heard, but even though like my prayer didn't seem like it was answered in a sense, technically, because it's not being answered, there's already been an answer to it, right? Like it's already been dictated by the being that this is not your determined route. This is not how you were supposed to be um, thinking in the first place. And I think that's the very big thing that I see prayer as being, is that said placebo, right? And even though I do push back when people say, well, people pray, but they don't act on the prayer, but people pray because they're lazy and they don't want to act. I don't necessarily agree with that, because I do see, even within certain church communities, Islamic communities, everything like that, people pray, but they act on certain things, like in charity they give their money away to a good cause, or they try to, like as you did, right, they with the bicycling for instance, and everything for a very good cause.
I think there's a combination of both, but I think the criticism mainly is against the people who say, I will pray for you, but you know very well that they won't. Um, the
Okay.
people that actually do pray for you are more likely to be someone that are also going to act and do something. But there are a lot of people who say, oh, I'm going to pray about that, or I'm going to pray for you, but they never do.
Exactly. So in a sense, they and that was the one thing that I found that was hypocritical, at least where I was, and where I when I joined Islam and even Christianity beforehand too, was that there was a lot of people, as you stated, saying that, oh, well, I'll pray for you, or okay, you're going through a hard time right now, I'll pray, or my thoughts and prayers go out to you. But
Mhm.
at some point, it's kind of like, I appreciate those thoughts and prayers, but there's a difference between the words and the actions
Right.
of a particular person doing.
Exactly.
And
Mhm.
I find that's the big problem, is that
Mhm.
there's a lot of thoughts and prayers going out, but there's not a lot of action behind those thoughts and prayers.
Mhm.
And I think that's a huge problem for, well, maybe not a huge problem, but a problem within the religious community. And don't get me wrong, I do know also within our community, also, there's a lot of things like, oh, well, I feel bad, or I feel that this particular circumstance is a horrible circumstance, but yet there's not a lot of action behind the person's feeling, right?
One thing that I would have to compliment one of the churches that I attended for is they had a crisis team.
Oh, wow.
They had a truck that was packed with water and non-perishable food, and a group of people that was willing to go on a moment's notice anytime there was a crisis in the United States. Like if there was a hurricane that hit, the crisis team would be activated. They'd jump in the truck and they'd take off, and they'd be ready to distribute water and food within hours. And, they were
Wow.
ready for that at any time.
Yeah, that's something that I'm definitely for. Like I'm not like, even though with my thought process I am a Gnostic atheist, but
Hmm.
still, if you're doing good things for just good good things sake, and not necessarily like, okay, I'm doing something good because I want brownie points with the man upstairs, I to me I say that is beautiful.
Hmm.
That I 100% uh, condone obviously those actions, and I think that more communities should be doing something along these lines, because that's like a crisis response team is very action oriented, obviously.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but also I think I got one more question for prayer in and of itself, is that as an atheist now, do you think that prayer is still something that is maybe not needed for somebody such as me and you, but still needed for individuals that are out there that are going through hard times? Like,
Not at all.
no, not at all.
Now, I do think that there is a place for meditation. And I've had a couple people encourage me to meditate, and I probably should try it, and I haven't, and I really should. But I don't think you need a deity. I don't think there's any purpose in praying to something that isn't there. I mean, you know,
Agreed.
why not pray to the sun god that, there's no sun god. It's kind of silly. But a
I
time of meditation to cleanse your thoughts and to just open up. Yeah, yeah, go for meditation.
Absolutely, I agree with that, because but there are certain individuals that I do hear that they say, well, if there wasn't a deity, then like the only thing that is holding them back from doing something that is quote unquote, I guess you can say, extremely harmful to society, is because there's a deity there and because they pray in order to better themselves in a sense, or one of their prayers is that they can continue down the straight and narrow, right? And I think that's where I would be for having individuals pray and believing in deity, because if that's the only thing that is keeping that person, quote unquote, a productive member of society, rather than somebody who's on the news because they've done horrible action A, B, C, D, or E, I would rather them have that belief, and from that belief not act upon what they truly intend to do, but they only hinder that because of the belief that they're going to have a horrible punishment if they do, right? But sorry, go ahead.
One thing that's a little bit different is prayer in the Assemblies of God Church.
Interesting.
The people who believe in praying in tongues, for them, prayer is something just slightly different. It's still a relationship with God, but instead of bringing requests to God, you're supposed to open yourself up to the Spirit and just utter whatever the Spirit lays on your heart, which is why they just utter gibberish, which when you really think about it from a skeptical point of view, why would the Spirit of God lay gibberish on your heart? Now it's supposed to be another language.
Hmm.
Supposedly you're praying in a language that no man can understand, but it's
Right. but
I,
but that's the thing, right? Like, I think that's like a Baptist or some sort of Baptist belief. I think I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but when I
praying in tongues.
yeah.
There might be a few Baptists, but that's pretty rare in the Baptist church. Most Baptist churches will agree that praying in tongues is a thing, but they don't really do it. It's really more the Assemblies of God and the Pentecostal churches that do that.
Okay. 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 Then maybe I was getting the two confused. That could be. But that's the thing. When a person prays within those tongues, they actually are tongues. When people pray within that gibberish, I should say, the thing that they believe is that they're actually speaking like a divine language. right?
Mhm.
They think that they're speaking the language of God or the language of the angels or whatever the situation is.
They do, and one thing that I found hilarious was, when I went to an Assemblies of God church, there was a young woman there that was sharing with the group that after coming to church for the first time, she was converted and she went home and she started praying and she said, "I got the first word in my prayer language." And some of the leaders were kind of like, "That's not how this works." And they were trying to very politely say that without discouraging her.
Oh man, but I don't know. Like for me, I find when people pray, I find that it's kind of like somebody, or not all people, but certain people are in like dire circumstances and they want to try to get out of those circumstances, so they pray in a sense. And for me, I feel that can be harmful in and of itself, because there are certain people that pray but then they feel that their prayer is going to be answered, so that they continue within the certain situation that can be very harmful to themselves,
Mhm.
very harmful to maybe even family members and stuff like that, because they're not saying the issues. And it kind of goes back to the abuse aspect, where, as we were stating in the beginning, that there's these, when people pray, they pray in order to show that outlier, this type of like facade, but then nobody really gets to see what's behind the curtain, in a sense. And it's only those who are either living within the vicinity of that individual or living within the proximities that you get to see the full array of what that individual is and what they do. But because a person prays and believes that that prayer is going to help them, they don't get out of that circumstance, which could be deadly or devastating for them in the long run.
The prayer that I find some of the most hypocritical is the prayer that isn't directed at God. It's directed at other people. The prayer that's a mini sermon.
Right. Yes. Or the threat prayer. I love
Mhm.
those. I love the threat prayer of well, I pray that God strikes you down at
Oh,
some.
I was thinking more in terms of, I pray that you will could correct your ways before God punishes you.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
those ones too.
Yeah.
I remember I got a lot of those when I left Islam. It was kind
Oh,
of
really?
like, yeah, correct yourself, brother, because you're going down the wrong path and you don't want to anger your God, right? For God is absolute and merciful, but He's also vengeful and stuff. And you're just like, what? Yes, fear is definitely going to bring me back into the. Well, I mean, maybe it does work for certain people,
It
but.
does. It does work for some people.
Mhm.
Yep. Mhm.
Because they're on their road of questioning, but then after they're like, well, and I think that's the other thing too, right? It's the hell aspect that people, I think, are so afraid of, in certain prospects.
I never got that.
Me neither, actually.
I think it's because I was not raised with it. Because I wasn't raised as a Christian.
Right, right, and likewise with my family. Like, even though that I was a Catholic, my mom was the most liberal Catholic you can think of. Like, so for her, and it was kind of like, not anything goes, but like, okay, I don't believe in hell. I don't believe that people are going to burn forever. I don't think that God cares if somebody is gay or not, or whatever the situation is. But there is a God and there is a Jesus, and that's predominantly what made her belief system. And but my father was 100% an atheist, and likewise with my grandfather before he converted to Islam, and actually influenced me into Islam as well. But
What age did you convert to Islam?
I was 15. I was
Okay.
15 when I
So your
converted.
journey is a little bit like mine because I was 16 when I converted to Christianity.
Yeah,
Although
yeah.
you figured that out a lot faster than I did.
Because I think that Islam in itself kind of shoots itself in the foot. I think
Mm,
that's the thing, right? Because
mhm,
when you really look at the Quran, and a lot of people, and this is where I find it kind of hypocritical in a sense, because it's kind of like asking the Christian, "Oh, don't read the King James version. You got to read the old Coptic version of Christianity to truly
mm.
understand Christianity, or the old
The
whatever."
Latin.
Exactly, the Latin version, in order for you to really grasp the essence. So it's like, then why the hell did you create these books to begin with? Like, if these books are going to be the thing that leads me to a false belief in a deity that's supposed to literally have my life on the line, where I can be eternally tortured or have eternal bliss, why have these translations which are going to lead me astray? And that's the one thing that I always think of. So for me, I'm thinking, well, obviously, the reason why is that they want people to be interested within the book itself, and they want people to get the gist of what the book is trying to say. And henceforth, we have the King James version, or we have Malik's version of the Quran, for instance, or whatever the situation may be. And for me, when we start seeing the way that women and everything like that really are treated within the Quran in and of itself, and women have half a mind of men and everything, we're at 15. I'm not going to lie. Yes, I thought that as well, towards a certain extent. But university in CEGA knocked that out of my head really fast, because there were so many women that were doing circles around me in knowledge, which I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, this thing, she's so far ahead of me, it's insane. How could this be? You know? And slowly but surely, it kind of just like builds up and builds up until you're finally, all the questions that you're asking, in a sense, don't have any answers to them. And you start to realize, well, this is for a particular time that was before the person was even around, and everything like that. So,
Mark Caesar is absolutely right. He
oh,
said,
what is my
Mark Caesar said, Gigi, I think the internet might have helped him more than you. And that's exactly it. If I would have had the internet in 1977, I would never have converted to Christianity.
right? But I think too, because that's the thing. There are certain religious individuals, just like Jehovah's Witness, right? Like Jehovah's Witness, they what they do is they wait until somebody is in their lowest moments and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and then they come to you, right? So a lot of people act more emotionally than they do logically, and when something really bad happens to you, you're all in your emotions, and that's when you're more susceptible to, well, maybe if I believe in this, maybe there could be that second chance, maybe I can get a better life and everything like that, and they just take hold of you before you
Mhm.
even realize what's happening, and you're in it, and there's no way for you to get out of it. Well, not there's no way for you to get out of it, but I mean, it's harder for you to get out of it because you think this is going to help you, rather than lead you astray, in a sense. Uh, but yeah, I think all in all, if anybody has any questions, please ask your questions. If not, I think this is a good time to end the stream. So thank you all for coming by. I really do appreciate it. This was a great conversation. Again, I've learned more, like I always do when talking with Godless Granny. So I really do appreciate having you on. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. Um, and what I why are my thoughts all jumbled up right now? But all to say is that I really do appreciate everybody coming by and everybody listening in. If anybody wants to become a fellow patron, please, within the description below, there's the patron page of um, uh, Atheist Enlightenment. Please go and check that out if you're interested. If not, it's perfectly fine. Again, thank you so much for coming on by. It's been a great show, and I hope everybody has a great night. And tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're actually going to have Randolph Richardson come on, and we're going to actually talk about the atheist community in general and how we can really flourish and make it better and everything like that. So it's going to be very interesting conversation tomorrow. So please stay tuned. Same time, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. Central Time, and 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All right. So everybody have a great night and see you in the morning.
Live your life.